welcome to the Ramsey Library Brown Bag session. And today we're excited to have Lori Horvitz and Jennifer McGaha back. And always look forward to their readings. So if you all just want to take it.
Thanks everybody for coming. And so we're going to talk about, we both have been working on collections of essays, and I'm just finished with mine in the last month or two, and Jennifer, I know, has just sent hers off to the publisher. So we're going to talk first about how we put these together, and maybe Jennifer, you could just kind of talk about how you put yours together. And we talked about this before, like when we put an essay collection together, the sum has to be greater than, or the whole has to be greater than the sum of its parts, right? So you have to kind of have some sort of arc, even though they're separate pieces that are interconnected. There has to be some sort of building upon and having the story, just like any other story. You have your plot, and then, you know, the resolution, and there's a transformative moment in the narrator. So, Jennifer.
Yeah, and for me, the process of doing an essay collection was very different than writing a linear memoir, which is what my first book was. So just trying, I think often when you're writing when you start writing, you don't really know what those threads are that are going to go through, or at least I didn't. And even when I started thinking they might be related, you still have to go back and think about, how do I tighten those connections for the reader? There are things that feel connected to me, but maybe they're not yet connected on the page. So that process of trying to tie things together and find a way to bring them together is really different than in another work I found. Have you found that, Lori?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult to have, 30 separate pieces and to try to kind of pull them together. But I think ultimately, just like writing any longer story, a memoir or a novel, you don't really know what you're writing about until you're finished. And then once you're finished and figure it out, you got to go back and sort of tie those threads together throughout. So it all makes sense as a collection. Did you find that?
Yeah. And I think, you and I have talked a lot about having other people help in that process too. And I know you used an editor at one point, and the editor with my publisher is helping me figure out, she helped me identify the pattern to my story. So at one point she said, a few of your chapters don't follow this form that the others do. And so here's the form you're using. And can you get the other chapters to do that? Which is really interesting, because I didn't know that I was using a particular form. I had not yet identified that, but she pointed it out to me. And I think those are the kinds of things that feel natural to readers, but there's a lot of stuff that you have to do in the crafting and revision stages to make it feel easier for readers, to make those the flow feel more natural.
Right. And I think with my experience, I didn't go into my collection saying I'm going to write a memoir collection. I just kept on writing essays. And of course, as my own person being obsessive, and like we all are, what we write about is what we're obsessed about, right? So you're going to have common themes anyway, right? But once I had like 30 essays, I got a grant from school through the Mills Grant, and I hired an editor named Catherine, who, Tema, you introduced me to. And she read the whole thing from front to back cover, and I felt like I really needed an outside perspective, because I was too close to it. I couldn't see what connections or disconnections were. And she made the connections in my 30 essays, that she said there's two arcs. She said one arc is about alcoholism and avoidant partners, and then and the other arc is a journey out of shame and a place of good love, of self-love and self-acceptance, and of fully embracing queerness and Jewishness. And so she's like, how could you get those two arcs to intersect more so? okay? And the way that I look back at it is connecting the avoidant partner mother issue, the avoidant mother, the avoidant partner, but also when you're an avoidant person in general, there's a certain self-loathing about you, right? You're going to probably treat yourself not that great when you're self-loathing. You're going to find partners who aren't that great for you. And also pulling together a maternal lineage, because my mother was very avoidant. Her mother, who was a Russian immigrant, was very depressed and avoidant. And my grandmother's younger my grandmother's younger sister was the only joyful relative I knew, and she was a closeted lesbian. So it's sort of like coming to terms with all of those things. So the last essay in the collection is actually teaching the class that I've been teaching for the last 2 semesters, called Queer Arts, Queer Activism, where I am like the queer role model to these students and I start off by like, well, if only they knew that I was like, I had been in one disastrous relationship after the next, because of my own internalized homophobia, because of stuff like that. But eventually I do come to understand and accept who I am and find a healthy relationship. So happily ever after. And how about you, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think, you've touched on, that's a lot. That's so much to put into one book, and 30 essays. That's a lot of essays as well. And it occurs to me that we're both really working on our second books. And with the first book, you sort of think when you're first writing, okay, once I get one book done and once I get it published, I will have mastered this process, right? And it's amazing to me how little I know every time I sit down to write, every time I sit down to think about what makes a collection or what makes a good story even. And I think it's just this constant learning and constant, just daily writing, the writing and the teaching that informs that writing. But I don't feel like I knew a whole lot more with this book than I did with my first one. And so it just feels like starting new every time. Did you feel that way? Because you have another collection and yours was an essay collection, The Girls of Usually. So was this different? Did you feel...
I felt like it was different because I felt like, or I feel like that the essays that I wrote in this for the new collection are, they go deeper. I think because I'm coming into them with more of an understanding, but still there's a long way to go. But I just feel like there's more knowledge behind them, at least in my head. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess we grow as people and we change, and our perspective on all of those experiences change over time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to read us an excerpt from one of yours?
Yeah, I'm going to read a short essay. And this essay, I believe it's probably about 3/4 of the way through my collection. And it's a real short essay. I edited it down for length, for time right now. It was actually just accepted at the South Dakota Review. So it's called Those Friday Afternoons. One of the heavily rotated 45 singles my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Diamond, played on Friday afternoons was Helen Reddy's I Am Woman. He introduced the song the day he taught us about women's liberation and Gloria Steinem. After school, I ran home, my Pippi Longstocking braids flapping from side to side to tell my family I was a women's libber. I didn't care that my brother mimicked my declaration, hand on his hip and all. I didn't understand how all women wouldn't advocate for equal rights. On Friday afternoons, Mr. Diamond let us do what we wanted. Half the class played spin the bottle. The other half sat at our desks, reading, talking, working on projects. We were the outsiders who moved our desks out of the way so the insiders could spin the bottle on gray speckled linoleum. A short, stocky guy with a ponytail, Mr. Diamond tried to come off as our cool teacher, but the Spin the Bottle kids made fun of his dandruff, though I never noticed. While I molded cats and dogs out of red clay for shoebox dioramas, from the corner of my eye I saw Patty Ward and Mitchell Feinberg on their knees in an awkward embrace, lips chafing together. After the kiss, Patty slowly wiped spit away from her sleeve, as if wiping off a piece of magic. Patty, who once tried to trip me in the hallway, and Mitchell, who asked me during a quiet lull on the morning bus to school, "Where's your tits?" I focused on the finely cut lawn out the window. Content to roll and pinch clay to create ears and tails, I had no desire to be part of the circle, not that I'd ever been invited. Why would I want to kiss Mitchell Feinberg or Stephen Calhoun, who slobbered over Melanie Gross? Marked as a loner since second grade, I gave up on making friends at school. Why bother when I have to endure the wrath from the same kids until high school graduation? I found consolation in art and music. I played guitar and wrote songs about my poodles and spent hours in a makeshift darkroom. At 16, I graduated a year early from high school and moved into a college dorm, one of the happiest days of my life. Now I could be myself, the person I thought I was, an upbeat, artsy chick. Boys invited me on walks and flirted. A month into the school year, a hippie boy asked me to be his girlfriend. I told him I felt flattered but thought of our connection as a friendship, which wasn't entirely true. Another boy had pursued me and he was cuter and more confident. I made sure to tell the cute boy about how I rejected the hippie, and he said, "Oh, I could have sworn you two would get together," and that night we kissed. My new boyfriend made fun of my sweet mate, a self-proclaimed bisexual feminist. When he waved goodbye to her, he said, "Bye," then turned to me and whispered, "I mean bisexual," and we laughed and kissed. 6 years later, I'd claim the same label for myself, but for now, my early feminist education was buried underneath heavy layers of mainstream culture. Between 6th grade and freshman year of college, I learned that feminists were ugly, angry women who couldn't get a man, and attention from any male affirmed womanhood. I disregarded Helen Reddy's proclamation about being strong and invincible. Now my strength came from male adoration. After a month of kissing and running away from my new boyfriend, he wanted more than I wanted to give. He moved on to a blonde, skinny dancer. I moved on to alcohol. One night I attended a hall party, and after downing my 3rd cup of grain alcohol punch, I kept telling anyone who'd listen, "Wow, this drink is so good. I don't think there's any alcohol in it." A deadhead boy invited me to get stoned with him and said something about radical feminists, and I thought about the scary, spiky-haired girls in motorcycle jackets who hopped around to Devo and Talking Heads on dance night in the student union. Now when Jerry Garcia finished singing Friend of the Devil, I ran back to the punch bowl. I vaguely remember getting sick. A friend dressed me in her white nightgown, and another friend hoisted me over his shoulder and walked me back to my room and put me to bed. The next morning at breakfast, I bumped into my hallmate. He stopped in his tracks and said, "What are you doing here? I thought you were dead." He saw me carried away in a white gown, but there was more alcohol, so he kept drinking. This was my idea of liberation, even if it meant almost dying. All through college, I flirted with boys, and as long as I was an object of desire, I felt a sense of worth. In retrospect, a bankrupt, disembodied sense of worth. In grad school, I served as a teaching assistant for a women's studies course. On the first day, the professor asked students if they considered themselves feminists. Along with most of the class, I didn't raise my hand. Instead, I slunk down in my desk, not wanting to be associated with the word's connotations, man-hating and screaming in the streets while holding up signs. The professor explained that the basic tenet of the word feminism is that all genders should have equal rights and opportunities. Ever since, I've slowly unearthed the buried-over inspiration I found in 6th grade, the day Mr. Diamond held up a copy of Ms. and told us that a woman's identity didn't have to be dependent on her marital status. As one of the organizers for the 2017 Women's March on Asheville, I devised a playlist for the event, placing I Am Woman at the top. When Helen Reddy's words echoed from the speakers, "I am strong, I am invincible," many of the 10,000-strong crowd sang along and raised their fists, reminding me of the day I ran home, excited to share my newfound women's liber status, when I didn't care about being part of the Spin the Bottle circle, when I was perfectly happy to mold red clay into whatever the hell I pleased, when I had the power to mold myself into whomever the hell I pleased. that's it.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm trying to find my applause reaction on Zoom here. Okay, there we go. One of the things I love so much, other than your voice, I love hearing you read it, is the way you're able to tie together the personal and what's happening in this personal revelation with the larger socio-political environment, what's happening in the world. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that, about how you do that, how you make the personal more universal, which you do.
Yeah, it's interesting because that I actually from a prompt I did last year during COVID, during a prompt group, that image of the spin the bottle kid that came up for that, and I was like, I've totally buried that image, but it's like it's really screwed up for a 6th grade teacher to let kids play spin the bottle in class. I was like, wow, like that really happened. And so I started with that idea, and then I just kept pushing at it. So what does this really mean? What am I trying to say? And I thought about the insiders and outsiders, and then how do I connect feminism and what Mr. Diamond would play, like, you know, I Am Woman. He introduced me to women's liberation. And so I was trying to kind of put this thread of insider, outsider, and then like that whole idea of insider, outsider, and then like hippie in college, and looking at like the feminists, the radical feminists as the outsiders, and then kind of like becoming one of them. And how is that like a universal theme of just insider, outsider, and yeah, so I don't know. I just kind of tried to pull these themes together from that one image of the kids kissing in class, and yeah.
Well, do you remember what the prompt was from your group that got you to that?
I can't remember what the prompt was. It could have been something about being an insider, outsider kind of thing.
Okay. So who? I think I hear some beat influences in your work, which would stand to reason since that's one of your specialties. And I'm wondering who specifically you might consider some of your influencers.
Some of my influencers. Isn't that like a term today for social media?
It's a term. Now you're going to be an influencer, but
well, you know, I appreciate some of the beats like Kerouac, and as far as like stream of consciousness, free writing kind of stuff. I wouldn't go along with the first thought, best thought, but I would go along with the first thought, use that to crack open. And yeah, so I definitely was inspired by the beats. I studied with Allen Ginsberg and took a class with him on the Beat Generation, and now I teach that class, sort of, not like Ginsberg, because I'm not Ginsberg, but and there's lots of, I love Megan Daum. I'm reading some really great nonfiction lately. I just started this book called Crying at the H Mart. It's by a Korean American, and it's really good. And yeah, so can't think off the top of my head of all the books I've read, but I've been reading a lot.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, let's hear from you.
Okay, thank you. So the book I'm working on now, or the book that's coming out next year, it's coming out in January of 2023, which actually isn't next year, it's the next year. But it's a work that is sort of a hybrid work. It's part memoir, part lessons that I've learned from being in the outdoors, lessons that I have applied to my writing life. It includes writing prompts and hopefully some tips that are helpful for people. The original title that I had for the book was Bushwhacking: Writing Lessons from the Trail. And my publisher felt like that maybe Writing Lessons from the Trail wasn't the best subtitle, perhaps that it limited the audience. So that it's more Writing Lessons for Life. So now we're brainstorming subtitles together. So I'm going to read a brief excerpt from the end of the book, from the last chapter, which nonfiction writers can do, and fiction writers can't so much. But the arc that I was talking about earlier that my editor noticed was that each chapter has a narrative, so an outdoor experience grounded somehow in the outdoors that leads to a craft lesson. Then there's usually another narrative, some sort of shorter narrative, and then a summation of those, sort of pulling them together and talking about what sort of wisdom, if any, I might have gleaned from those experiences. And one thing that's been fun about writing this isn't an adventure book. It's not about having any grand experience in the outdoors. I love those books about grand experiences, but this is about some really simple moments in the outdoors, hiking, zip lining, mountain biking, that kind of thing. So this comes fairly close to the end, and it's a section on thinking about endings. Though he only had a sixth grade education, my grandfather was one of the best storytellers I've ever known, and he taught me much of what I know about writing and most everything else. He grew up in the Sandy Mush community in Buncombe County, so deep in the country that at the local church cemetery, among the fading tombstones, a sign read, "Burial by permission only." Though his paying job was at Champion International in Canton, he farmed his whole life. And the country ways of being, the cycles of farming, of planting and harvesting and laying the field to rest, depended on a physical grounding in nature. The autumn he died, when he was in hospice, he talked incessantly of the snow falling around him, the icy roads, about how he had wrecked and needed a plow. Then one October afternoon, in a rare moment of lucidity, he turned to me and asked, "Are the acorns falling yet?" It was a simple question, but filled with all the great ones. What season of life are we in? How do we find our way from one season to the next? And what do we do with the moments in between? My grandfather knew about such things, about how to bravely seek out beauty and how to hold on to it when he found it. And he passed this wisdom along to me in his own quiet, humble way. He was also a big believer in what we might now call experiential learning. When I was a kid, he and my grandmother often took me and my brother to Gatlinburg to drive bumper cars and eat fudge and ride the chairlift. Along the way, we would stop to feed the bears that congregated along the parkway just over the Tennessee line. I don't remember how we knew they would be there, if we went at a certain time of day or if we always stopped at the same overlook. I just remember that we pulled over to the side of the road, spilled out of the car, and ran to a rock wall maybe 3 or 4 feet high. Just below that, black bears, often several at a time, sometimes mothers with cubs, waited. I did not know then that feeding wild bears was a bad idea, and I doubt my grandparents did either. We were not overly enlightened in the 70s, and we simply saw some cute bears and thought, hey, why not? Aren't they really just giant furry ducks? When I think of this now, I wish I could say that I'm horrified. It was dangerous for us and for the bears whose encounters with us may have emboldened them and made them aggressive with other humans. And yet the sweetness, the purity of this memory persists. I remember the thrill of riding in the back of my grandparents' brown Nova, the windows rolled down, hot air whipping my face, my grandfather's suntanned arm flung out the car window, my grandmother's plastic rain scarf cinched at her throat. I remember clutching between my sweaty thighs a sunbeam bag full of heels of stale bread and saltine crackers. I remember how I could barely contain myself, how my brother could always contain himself. I remember his quiet grin, his barely noticeable, if you did not know him, excitement, the way he sat on the edge of the vinyl seat, no seatbelt, looking attentively out the car window in case my grandfather needed help with directions. My grandfather flicked on the turn signal and pulled to a stop near the wall. Outside the car, he lit a Camel and stood off to the side, smoking and watching my grandmother, her lovely, creamy arms folded in front of her, her head thrown back as she laughed. Once, a bear reached up and took a cracker right from my hand. "Careful, Junebug," my grandfather called to me. Almost 5 decades later, I remember the bear's musty smell, the feel of her rough tongue against my fingers, the guttural rumbling deep in her throat when I leaned in too close. I jumped back, startled, yes, but also delighted, entranced, consumed with a joy so pure, my brain stored it safely away, marked it so that in the years to come, I could easily find it when I needed to conjure something marvelous. Lately, my running song of choice has been Beautiful by the Americana Quartet, the two tracks. In the song, the speaker asserts that the story of an afterlife is simply that, a tale we have created to assuage our fears of dying. Aside from that one line, the song is filled with rhetorical questions that celebrate the beauty of the here and now. Over and over, the song asks, if the afterlife can be more beautiful than this one, the line, can it be any more beautiful than, is completed with various examples of earthly delights: the Pacific Ocean, redwood forest, the Blue Ridge Mountains, New Orleans, Mississippi, good whiskey, you and me. Taken together, these questions propel us toward an imperative: do not miss the beauty of this world. What began as a series of questions thus becomes a charge to live our lives more fully here and now. Powerful questions change us. They reshape the ways we think and the ways we move in this world. And as writers, we must learn to ask those hard questions that lead us to deeper understandings. Each and every time we sit down to write, we must embrace our doubts, probe our vulnerabilities. We must wait expectantly for the next good thing to come. We must, metaphorically speaking, of course, feed the wild bears. And we must return to Brenda Euland's imperative to give freely of ourselves, to write with compassion and generosity. And in those moments when we doubt ourselves, when we feel like imposters, a bunch of know-nothing wannabes, we must remind ourselves that there is tremendous freedom in the partly known, the unknown, the can never be known. We need not have all the answers. We need only to seek passionately and earnestly the beauty of this world. Even now, as I worry that I do not know enough about writing or about the outdoors or about life in general to be writing this book, I remind myself that these words are as much for me as they are for you, so that I may come to know this wondrous world more fully. Even with all the things I do not yet know, I belong here. You belong here. We belong in this space where joy and courage and curiosity and empathy and fortitude collide and spark a force greater than any element of craft or trick of the trade. And so we wait for the right questions to arrive, for the right ending to reveal itself, so that we can move together from this moment to the next. The acorns have begun to fall. What am I going to do with that? What are you? What wondrous, wild adventure comes next?
That was really beautiful, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I love that metaphor of feeding the wild bears. And I'm wondering how, when you teach writing, how do you tell your students about feeding the wild bears? Like, how do you bring that idea into the classroom?
It's a challenge, right? Because in creative writing, we often come at the teaching of writing differently than we do when we're teaching writing in other ways, right? Or other kinds of writing. And sometimes students are resistant to that. They are stuck in their really academic brains, where they want to know the ending before they start. They want to know the structure. They want, they're really comfortable with an introductory paragraph and supporting paragraphs and a conclusion. And they want the whole assignment on the first day of class versus the prompts that you might give them to lead them to discovery. And I think it's a lot of just talking about that process of saying, here's what I'm doing. It's going to feel a little wild and maybe uncomfortable and messy, but that's what creative writing is. And so just sort of explaining that it's a different process than maybe anything they've encountered before.
Yeah, and I loved it's kind of like the ride you took us on, starting with your grandfather and then feeding the bear. and then how life is like, how writing is like feeding the wild bears. And I'm wondering, like, what was the process of you writing that essay? Like, did you start with the image of your grandfather and just move on from there, or the acorns? Because I love that also. Is like, are the acorns falling? So, and like, what was the process? Was it starting there, or did you have to go back and figure out what it was about?
And this is part of a longer chapter that's about asking questions. It's about endings and finding your ending, and how it's okay to end sometimes with a lot of questions, more questions than answers, more questions than what you started with. So the beginning of this chapter is actually, I started writing when I was hiking with one of my hound dogs over the summer, and we encountered a big black bear, and it was in the evening, and we were alone on the trail, and the bear was really close and wouldn't move out of the way. So I started writing about that, and about how terrified I was, and about how later on I kept wishing that I had enjoyed that moment more, that I had let go of my fear and have appreciated how close I was to that bear, and how I may never be that close to another bear again. And so I started thinking, and then that led me to this memory, right? So thinking about how there was a time when I wasn't so fearful, and when I could appreciate the moment. I mean, there's healthy fear, right? But there is anyway, that memory led me into the other one. And then I started thinking about, how does that translate into writing? How does being courageous, translate into the work that I do, and being open and okay with the unknown, and with being a little afraid.
Yeah, and taking risks, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you can take risks to break through, right? And by feeding the bear, you took a risk but didn't know it. And
Yeah.
how many times can we take risks and not know it? But our naivete saves us, right? It's like when I went traveling all over Europe by myself, and I'm like, oh, sure, I'll stay at your house. I don't know these guys, and I was always safe, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important for writing too. I'm wondering what inspired you to get this collection together, as far as nature and writing, and what inspired you to put this together?
I think I was just thinking about in this time when the world has just been everything has seemed so crazy. And I feel like so many of the things, I think so many of us have ended up in this place of this world that we thought we knew and understood has sort of been upended in the last, and continues to be, in a way, in the last years. And I kept thinking, what do I know? Like, what is it that I know? I don't know a lot, but I do know some things. And how do I know it? And so I just kind of, some of the stories are stories that I have played with over the years, that I have written in different forms. But I started going back and thinking, if there's one thing I know, it's how to sort of find peace in the outdoors, and how to bring that back into my writing life. And if that is helpful to someone, maybe I can get that on the page.
Great. Yeah. I'm wondering if other people have questions for Jennifer.
I'm sorry, I'm doing a terrible job monitoring the chat.
No, it's okay. We can only do 4 things at a time, not 5.
Obi, you said something was the gendered term. Was that influencer?
Yeah, my wife and I talked about how influencer is a gendered term because, people tend to say men are entrepreneurs or fashion bloggers, but then a woman is, oh, she's a model, she's an influencer.
Okay.
I'm so out of the social media situation that didn't. But that's interesting. I like the idea. I mean, like, entrepreneurs for men and money, and influencers are just like, cultural influencers, but there's no money attached or something like that. So,
Professor Horvitz.
Yes.
When did you first start writing essays?
Well, interesting that you ask. I actually got hired at UNCA to teach fiction. And I only started writing nonfiction right before I got hired. And I actually started out as a poet. I have an MFA in poetry. And then I went to a PhD program, and I started writing fiction because I was like, actually it was a feminist theory class, my first semester of a PhD program. It wasn't feminist theory, it was a feminist class. I can't remember the name of it. But we read books, and then we wrote response papers, but she also made everyone write 2 pieces of fiction. And so I was forced to write fiction, and I did, and I really liked it. I was like, oh, this is fun. I can make stuff up. And then I wrote a novel for my dissertation. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, so nothing happened with that. But then I was living in New York for the year between my PhD program and moving to Asheville. But I think I started just writing essays. And I remember I started writing an essay about working at an Irish American newspaper in New York, and there was a man there who ended up dying of AIDS, and somehow like it felt like I found my genre, even though I still wrote some fiction. I really enjoyed nonfiction. So I started writing in 1999 nonfiction.
Wow. And do you write every day, Professor McGaha?
No, I try to write regularly, but no, not every day. I go outside every day, and some days I can't do both. I go outside, and almost always in the woods, every day except maybe a couple of days out of the year if I'm traveling or if I'm sick or something. But for the most part, if I have to choose one or the other, I always choose that. And then I just feel like that living a balanced life for me, having that life that doing other things feeds my work. And so I do think that a writing practice is good and writing with regularity is good. But I do think, that a lot of us can't write every single day. Right. And so what do we prioritize? We can't be everything, And so I strive for that balance.
Thank you both.
Yeah. Are there other questions? Kristen?
Yeah, I was thinking about what you were saying about getting distance from your own work in order to have clarity and kind of, I guess, connecting it, improving it, having some sense of stuff. And I was wondering how each of you gets that clarity. I mean, I would guess, Jennifer, that you go in the woods, but I was thinking, like, where do you work out that the stuckness, or get rid of all the fragments and start distilling things down? Where does that work actually happen? Is it when you're facing the computer on the page, or is it at another time usually?
Well, I know it's a good question. I mean, I feel like sometimes I just need some distance. Reading something over, sometimes I need 6 months of distance from a piece. I know that for my first book, the editor had like 4 pages of single space comments, and I couldn't even, it was kind of towards like the end of the semester, and I was busy with work, and I looked it over and I couldn't even read it. I was just like, I can't deal with it. But I did read it once through, and I was like, yeah. And I think that a lot of times we don't want to hear this criticism, but then if we just let it stew and let it mulch in our mind, so then a month or two later it's probably a month later when I looked at it again, I was like, yeah, she's got a point. Yeah. And so sometimes distance is what helps. And also I also love going outdoors and walking and thinking about things. And sometimes things come up for me, whether it's walking in the woods or sitting in the bathtub. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a good connection there, right?
And talking with other writers, right? Like Lori and I talk about our work. And I've actually talked about these two pieces that we read today a while back. And that's so helpful to me, so that even, just to have a conversation about what you're trying to do, what your intent is, with someone who can hear that and respond compassionately about, okay, here's something you might want to think about. Someone who can ask you those questions, maybe not tell you what to do with it, but who can find those holes, and ask you the question to lead you to figure out for yourself what you need to do. There's a lot of visiting the page and then walking away and revisiting it for me. I think what you were saying, Lori, the space, that distance. And sometimes for me, it is 6 months, it's a few months before I can really, really look at a piece objectively.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Robin?
I can just appreciate how true that is. I have Jennifer, luckily, for a creative writing class. And we went over a piece I had written last week, and she critiqued it. And I wrote down everything she said, and the little devil on the shoulders thinking, why do I have to explain that? I know what, but I just put it to the side. And this weekend I went back and did the corrections, and it made it a so much better story. And it's like, I can't wait for her to read it now, because it really fixed what was wrong with my story that I didn't realize was wrong with my story. And just by letting it go and pushing it to the side and looking at it 2 days later, I was able to accept it as, oh, yeah, that is kind of like, who is he? I didn't explain this anywhere, and it really helped so much, and I appreciate that. But sometimes you have to let your ego go just a little bit and accept help.
Thank you for that, Robin.
No, I really appreciated it.
Cool. Sometimes all it takes is one question. What does the narrator want? What's the narrator going to do about this? What's getting in the way? I think that sometimes you just have to hear that question and then think about it. And then all of a sudden, maybe the answer will come. But are there any other questions? Yeah, Carol?
Yeah. First of all, may I use your statement in my own writing? Let criticism mulch in my mind. I love that.
I think I stole it from somebody. I don't know who.
This has been so inspirational and helpful. When I was in your class, Lori, I remember the main criticism was that I would tell too much in one story, go from one thing to the other. And in my stupid defensiveness, when I heard your story, which I loved, or essay, I thought, well, she went from 4th grade to college. But I saw how you tied it all together, and that told me so much. So thank you both.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And this is for either one of you. I'm curious how you feel with the first version of what you wrote. Was it something that you felt like had a totally different trajectory, or was so much smaller in scope than what it became? And I just in my own writing, when I write a draft, I feel like sometimes by the end it just feels so much different than what I set out to do, and sometimes that's scary. You're kind of off the rails a little bit, and you don't know whether you're moving away from what you should be focusing on or towards it. I'm curious to hear you speak about that.
Lori, you want to take that?
Well, I know that my piece that I read today was a lot different than in the first draft than in the last draft. And I think I just kept pushing at it. And it's like, what does it really mean? What am I trying to say? What does it mean that the narrator was molding these things? And how could I kind of pull that back to a more universal message? Like, I always tell students, like, everything in your piece should be connecting, should be moving the story forward, right? Like, if there's any major details, you can't just put them in there for the sake of putting in there because they sound cool. They have to be there for a reason. And so I was looking back, well, what is the reason for all of this? And I think that every time I pulled back and looked at it and then pushed in and started writing more, it became bigger but also more connected and cohesive. So yeah, but I think at first it was smaller, like the insiders and the outsiders of, what the hell was Mr. Diamond doing, letting the class play spin the bottle, and stuff like that. So Jennifer,
And what was he really?
I don't know. That's a whole other thing.
That was a bad move. I guess for me, just to kind of speak to the emotional trajectory that I have with writing, is I agree with, I do everything that you just said, Lori, about going back to a piece and asking those questions. But my emotional state is normally I write something new and I'm excited about that. That's the thing in front of me is always what I'm most excited about. And so I'll just get really excited. And then if I give myself 24 hours to look at it, I'll just think it's the worst thing I've ever seen. Like, no one has ever written anything so terrible. And it's like the stages of grief. I go through these stages. And then I'll come back and I'll think, well, this one paragraph wasn't so bad, or maybe this one sentence. And I'll pull that one sentence and maybe start from there. So it's this sort of, I think being a writer for me is being sort of constantly dissatisfied with everything I do, writing wise, with some brief interruptions of that when I'll feel, okay, I captured that moment, or I was really able to do that in that moment. But sort of living in this state of constantly revisiting. I mean, eventually something goes out and gets published, maybe, or so that's a final form, I guess, and then you're done with it, and then you don't tinker with it anymore. But until that point, I'm constantly thinking, how can I change it? How can I make it better?
Yeah, in fact, the essay that I read today, I edited it down a little, but as I was reading it, I noticed a little typo, or not a typo, but I was like, and so it's like, okay, like, you just, like, when you read it, it becomes something different. That's why I always tell my students, please read your stuff aloud before you hand it in, because you can hear a lot of repetitions or things that you might not need. So I thought I read mine aloud before, but are there any other questions? Then if not, I want to thank everybody for coming and listening, and yeah.
I had one more, Swan.
Okay.
What was the first thing you ever got published, both of you?
I had poetry published when I was in grad school. I started sending poetry out, so I got a bunch. Poems are easier to publish because they're tiny, but yeah, I got a bunch of stuff published in tiny journals, stuff that's advertised in the back of Poets and Writers that you've never heard of, like these journals. I just sent stuff out, and yeah.
Mine was a little story, a very brief, like, flash piece, although I didn't know it was flash back then. It was a long time ago, about my daughter turning 12. That seemed like a big moment to me at the time. It was about her middle school dance, and sort of reflecting back on being 12 and having a 12-year-old, and how that's kind of a moment right before everything changes in your life. Maybe it's earlier now. Maybe it's 10 now. I don't know. But back then it was 12. So that was the first thing I published. I don't remember the name of the journal, but it was exciting.
Were you in college?
No.
You had a 12-year-old.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, was I in but I did both my grad programs after I had children. So I was trying to think, was I in school? I don't think so.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have something. I was trying to show you my acorn necklace. I'm such a nerd. And now I'll always think of your story when I wear it. I love oats and acorns. Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you around.
Yes, thank you all so much.
Oh, thank you. We enjoyed it.